Welcome to Winston's Cellar. Relax, listen, enjoy.
Zenith shot a smoldering glare at the human that was helping him. Up and at him! Let's get that leg up for a splint. The human's voice came out casual. Too casual for the creature that had broken Zenith's leg. They had been in hand-to-claw combat moments ago. Zenith had lost the bout and was about to lose his life. But the glowing white light that bloomed in the green sky stopped the human's violence. The color meant ceasefire to these humans. Zenith snarled at the human. Why should I listen to you, human? The human gave Zenith an incredulous look. Because you need your leg if you want to keep walking. Unless you don't want 'em, then no skin off my bones. Zenith sneered at the human, but he lifted his leg. He didn't want to lose the appendage. He didn't want to live another 1,000 solar cycles without it. The Nuver looked down on lost limbs. Something about incompleteness, about how poor decisions led to poor bodies. If he lost his leg, then it would be a clear statement that Zenith made a poor choice. That was like social death with the Nuver. The human moved his bionic arms around Zenith's leg. A splint locked down the broken flesh and bones. Zenith didn't get it. Why would a human help what he destroyed just moments ago? The Nuver were deliberate in their actions. They had to be. Their entire civilization relied on the right action, no matter the cost. It's how it had always been. Then humanity came. Humanity pushed the Nuver to do rash, fast actions. The entire civilization broke after the first solar cycle. Now it seemed that Nuver lost after the second solar cycle. Yet Zenith didn't get it. How could such a frail species defeat the Nuver? Why? Zenith asked the human. The human's blue eyes looked confused by Zenith's question. Huh? Why what? If it's why I'm helping your sorry ass, it's because that's why you do after a war. Build up those who lost. If you're asking why I could kick your sorry ass into last week, well, that's easy. The human's eyes shifted to a mischievous twinkle. Someone takes too long to decide what to do. That's because you move too fast. You don't fight as we do. Too fast and reckless. I could have killed you if... Ah! Zenith yelled as the splint tightened up. The human patted the splint, sending another flaring pang of heat through Zenith. Zenith gritted his teeth. He hated this human. He didn't need to spend a century to figure that out. You just moved too slow, the human said with a smile. Zenith watched the human fall backward and landed on the ground in a sitting position. He looked up at the sky and grinned. Honestly, it's kind of nice fighting you. You lot don't make any mistake other than being slow. Zenith answered back with silence. The human looked at him with a level look. What's your mad about getting roughed up a lit bit? Come on, it's all fair in love and war. Don't you know that? Zenith felt his hateful expression melt into inquisitiveness. The speed at which it happened shocked Zenith. Usually, it took him one lunar cycle for him to change his emotions. Now they moved like a sand flurry. What do you mean by that, human? The human cocked an eyebrow at Zenith. What, you never heard that before? Zenith propped himself up and shook his head. No, never. The human's face changed to surprise. Huh. Looks like pigs can fly. Saying means that anything goes when emotions are involved. Or at least, I think that's what it means. The human moved his jaw while he thought about what to say next. You never fought with someone like that before? You know when it's all emotion and no mind. No, we Nuver are rational. We do all things after deliberation. Emotion is rash and weak. The human smirked at that. Then why'd you lose, Mr. Rational? Zenith snarled at the human. Because we never met a species like yours. You're the only species that is so against the mind. To think you'd risk yourself as you do. I heard of the Mantis Stand. Your human warriors held the space station to the last man. Had they surrendered, we Nuver would have advanced and taken the chokehold. Yet your kind fought. Even when all was lost, they destroyed the station. What kind of individual fights until they die? It makes no sense. Zenith truly didn't understand. How could a rational mind bear out such conviction where martyrdom was preferable to surrender? The human chuckled. See, big bug, that's why you lost. You're too busy fighting with this. The human pointed at his head. Instead of fighting with this, the human placed that same finger on his heart. See, when you fight with your heart, the whole universe is gonna feel it. That's why we humans fight so hard. We don't waste our time doing what's right. We just try to do what's good. Zenith cursed at the human. Then why fight us if you do what is good? Ain't you listening? I said we try to do what's good, not that we do it every time. We ain't like you lot. We don't live by our successes. We live by our failures. Zenith scoffed at that. Ah, so is that how you made it out here so far? The question was a poorly disguised insult, but the human answered honestly. Yep. Zenith took in the human. What do you mean? The human shrugged. I mean what I say. We humans got here not off taking the right path. Oh no. The human whistled. We took the wrong path far more than you can know, Bugman. We got more dead bodies going down the wrong path than we do lives going down the right path, but that's just humanity. Wrong species at the right time, I think. That's a fatalistic way to see the world, isn't it? The human clicked his tongue. Depends what you mean. See, we ain't like you, Nuver. You lot live forever. At least a millennia from what I heard. Y'all got time to do what we humans don't. Hell, you could deliberate about what you want to eat longer than I'll be alive. So we humans gotta live fast. We make choices because we have to, not because we want to. The human shrugged again. Listen, you can live a life of right choices, but we humans can't. We ain't designed for it. We make fast, wrong choices and hope for the best. Sometimes we're right, a lot of time we're wrong. But doesn't change the fact that in the end, we're alive like you. We just do it differently. So if that why from earlier is about why can patch you up after trying to kill you, well, it's because I can't burn my entire life hating you. It won't do either one of us good. Zenith felt his emotion shift once more. The sheer difference in their way of life scared Zenith. But his emotions didn't go to fear. He felt sympathy for the human. That sounds frightful. We make the most of it. After all, if we didn't, then we'd have nothing. Silence fell between the two. In that flash of an instant, the human had said something that would stay with Zenith for centuries. It wouldn't be until later that Zenith came to realize that sometimes ideas live longer than lives. But that's a different story. So, the human began, how's that leg of yours? Good. Thank you, Zenith meekly said. Don't mention it. As I said, all's fair in love and war and whatever. But don't doubt for a second I won't be there trying to patch your sorry ass up when we're in peace. The human smiled at Zenith. Hell, now that we ain't killing each other, maybe we can become buds. What do you say, Bugman? Zenith chuckled at that. Humanity may have been a species that decided far too fast, but Zenith started to see how enough failures could get the species on the right path. A part of me argued that it really wasn't the humans' fault. They were newcomers to the galactic stage. They hadn't developed the wealth of experiences that the other races had. Some even argued that their racial naivety was a strength. Freed from the long-held grudges and stereotypes that other races held tightly to, humanity beheld the galaxy and all of its inhabitants with fresh eyes. I wanted to believe that the humans could help us learn more about ourselves. In fact, I was one of the loudest voices in support of the new human crew member. but even I had underestimated the human's ability to pack bond with inanimate objects and dangerous creatures. "It's just a kitty." "No human. A Theandra is not just an anything. They are voracious predators who will eat anything that moves." The human smiled widely at that. Logically, I knew that this was a sign of mirth, likely at my expense. But it was disturbing how such smiles displayed the sharper human canine teeth. "That is the thing. You can't run from it. Then you are just begging to be chased. You have to let it come to you and smell you first. You have to let it know you. Then you can pet it all you like." Jimu shuddered at the human's expression. Any Taldras who had ever gotten close enough for a Theandra to smell their scent had become its prey. Few were fortunate to survive such experiences. Jimu had never put too much stock into the tall human stories that had spread through the quadrant. Surely they had to be exaggeration or superstition. What species would willingly expose themselves to solar radiation burns on a regular basis because they found their body's defensive mechanism to it visually appealing? There was another story, however, about humans turning all of their most fearsome predators into pets that was beginning to sound all too likely to be true. Theandra do not allow themselves to be pet, nor would any Taldras attempt it. The mere idea of it is ludicrous, an attempt at self-destruction. These are not creatures that can be tamed. Fortunately, with the planet behind, we are safe. Just be more careful in the future, human. The human's smile had only somehow grown at that. It's perfectly safe and well behaved. Here, I will show you. The human had taken one of his left arms and lead him towards the cargo bays. The human truly didn't understand proper form at times. "Show me what, human?" The cargo bay doors had loomed large above them as they approached. "How well trained the kitty is. It's very smart, you know. It does everything I ask." The human opened the cargo bay door, and the smell washed out of it. Blood. With its weaker olfactory senses, the human didn't seem to notice. "By the glories! You brought it with you?" Jimu scrambled back from the door, out of the human's hold. He scrambled for the door's emergency override when soft thuds sounded nearby. He froze as primitive fear responses overrode his brain. He could smell the stronger scent of blood with that particular musk all his people knew and feared. He turned to see the human approach the Theandra. The small figure stood only half as tall as the creature, but instead of attacking it, merely reached out and pulled the human close. It even started licking the human, grooming it. Understanding grew within Jimu. It really wasn't the human's fault. The alpha predator of the sector appeared to pose no threat to the human. It truly seemed to want to please it. It was almost as if the kitty had claimed the human as its property or pet. And now, as the human waves and urged Jimu to join it, he felt the eyes of death come to rest on him. The human didn't understand. It really wasn't its fault. In those days, one could not escape the dust. It blew in the open doors, collected in the corners. People choked on it, in some cases, died by it. In the brown wind flew microplastics, radiation, and sewage. The world and her resources were used up, and it would be many millennia before the Earth could heal herself. Assuming, of course, that humans disappeared long before that. The bleakness crumbled governments, overwhelmed hospitals. The sun, which hung in the sky as a dim disk of light, no longer offered life to the plants, nor warmth to the animals. It was so cold. Neiman Oxenrider watched the crackling flames consume the rocking chair legs in the fireplace. The power was no longer reliable. In a last-ditch effort to preserve the planet, the city had switched exclusively to solar power. Now there wasn't enough sun to go around anymore. They had begun burning furniture for warmth, and Neiman, not a wealthy young man by any means, was worried they'd run out of wood soon Dad paced in the living room. He was always pacing these days, since he was laid off from the distribution center. The longer he stayed unemployed, the more manic he became. He spent hours every day taking his guns apart and putting them back together, counting the few cans of food left in our pantry and poring over city maps. He never spoke about whatever it was he was planning, but he was planning something. Mom, on the other hand, had locked herself away upstairs. Neiman hadn't seen her in days, but could hear her infrequent footfalls on the floorboards. The chair smelled bitter as it disintegrated in the fire. It gave off a bitter, acrid scent of furniture polish and particle board. Neiman held quiet resentment. He resented the generations of humans who burned through the world's resources haphazardly, dying before they could reap the consequences of their indulgences. He resented his mother and father for being distant and strange. He resented himself for burning this wood and further darkening the sky outside. With a deep sigh, his breath clouded before him. He would die hungry and cold, and probably alone. The lights flickered on, bulbs clicking and buzzing in the few unburnable lamps. The fire no longer offered the halo in a dark room, but seemed dim compared to the electric lights. "Power's on!" Dad called out, the first unmuttered words in days. When this happened, people were supposed to ration their electricity, but no one ever did. As soon as one crisis ended, the world seemed to forget it ever happened. Dad turned on the TV. He wanted to get some news before the power went off again. No one knows where the strange machines have come from, but they appear to be pulling dust into their turbines. The U.S. military has denied involvement and is cautioning the public to stay far away from these UFOs until they can determine their origin. UFOs? The acronym piqued Neiman's interest, and he turned his head toward the TV. Dad was standing with his arms folded, watching intently. "Aliens too?" He guffawed, as if it was some sort of cosmic joke, too terrible to truly be upsetting anymore. He turned his head toward Neiman with a smile, but not one of gladness. It was one of cynical frustration. What good would his guns be against aliens? The images on the TV were fuzzy and far away, the dust's sepia tone obscuring the object in the sky, which resembled a large floating turbine. Eventually, there were more reported, all over the world. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. The dust cleared, and new machines appeared, flat discs, which formed clouds around them, raining green, earthly liquid from the sky. Hours later, ivy and mushrooms sprouted. They grew around garbage, plastic, tired, old abandoned cars, and consumed them. The sun was out and bright. People emerged from their homes and squinted to one another. It took a month. Mom had descended from her grief nest upstairs and had a renewed energy about her. She apologized to Neiman over and over, holding him in her arms and making promises to do better. It wasn't enough, of course. 3 years had passed where Neiman had only known his mother as a reclusive zombie, but it was something, more than he ever expected to have again. His father took longer to soften, suspicious of what he called the eye of the storm. He continued to hoard guns and food. Then he started growing vegetables and canning them. This hobby turned into a passion strong enough that he forgot about his survivorist plans. This passion became a vocation, and Dad made sure that everyone in the neighborhood had access to fresh food. We were all afraid to question the origins of this salvation. The Christians predictably credited Jesus for their salvation and patted themselves on the back for all their prayers. They immediately went back to lives of indulgence. But 6 months later, after more machines had materialized to clean the oceans, cool the ice caps, and scrub the orbit of dead satellites, those responsible for saving the world announced themselves. First, they communicated via radio waves to the world's leaders, asking for a joint conference. Each country happily obliged, interested to find out who these anonymous benefactors were and what it was they now expected of the world they'd saved. Additionally, presidents and representatives had hoped to make history by asking these aliens some poignant, quotable question to be preserved in the annals of history. Neiman and his family, now with new furniture crafted by a hobbyist turned master woodworker down the street, watched the live conference from their living room. They expected tentacles, huge eyeballs. Neiman had watched too many reruns of The Simpsons, he realized, but he couldn't get the violent green monsters out of his head. When the alien delegation entered the room, surprise swept over the whole world. "Jesus, they look like us," Mom announced as she squeezed Neiman's hand. And they did, although their skin was bluer and their eyes were yellow. There were very small additional differences. Their hair was thicker and silky, perfectly manicured everywhere it appeared. They were shorter, the tallest of the small crowd, a good 3 inches shorter than President Pompey, a short but fierce woman at a mere 5'2". "We are a galactic convoy of life preservers. We travel space seeking planets which can sustain intelligent life. We nurture planets with potential. Your Earth had entered an extinction phase common to all fledgling higher beings. We believe that with assistance, Earth can do great things." The alien spoke with a gentle cadence and an ambiguous accent, almost Norwegian in inflection, but smooth enough that it felt at home in every ear. The aliens wanted no payment. They expected no trade deals or treaties. They wanted humanity only to get well. The world did indeed heal, and humanity matured to understand that the planet was more than a collection of consumables to be exploited. Communities transformed into tight-knit artisan clans, within which there was no want. Religions formed around the alien cultures, and earth worship became common. The tenets of this new faith were simple. Care for creation as it cares for you. Care for others as you care for you. Care for yourself as you hope to be cared for. It was a faith without a god and without leadership, encouraged and grown by the Redeemers, the names humanity had given to the aliens. The relationship between the Redeemers and the Earthlings continued to deepen, the aliens becoming fascinated by humanity's penchant for art and humor and embodied love. They expressed confusion over war in such a world, frequently asking how that which kills infected humanity so. That which kills was a name the aliens seemed to call evil. It was the spirit of greed and fear which drove intelligent creatures to kill one another. That which kills was an old god, a being of violence and sabotage. It was one the Redeemers had conquered long ago, or so they said. Hundreds of years later, the Redeemers disappeared. Contact was cut off, and only silent blackness came from space. They had left with just one message: the witch kills has come back. Nex Oxenrider operated a network of hydroponic pyramids built to grow food cleanly and quickly for surrounding communities. He loved his work, as it was the kind of labor that made a difference in the world. His great-grandfather had endured the bleakness as a child and left a detailed account of his experience. He had burned furniture for warmth, scraped the dried bottoms of empty cans for food. When the Redeemers came, his father had taken to farming, and the green thumb stuck. Soon, Neiman had taken the mantle, and his children after him. The Oxenrider family made it their mission to prevent hunger from striking anyone in their communities, and they had seen incredible success. Nex boarded the train in Iowa City. In 34 minutes, it would arrive in Omaha, where he was assisting a local co-op in building their own pyramid networks. A tone pinged on the train, and holographic displays appeared on the train car ceiling. It was an odd thing, this futuristic technology appearing against the fine woodwork of the train car. As humanity had rebuilt, they began to consider beauty in their everyday lives. Train cars were no longer vaguely gray boxes, but finely adorned masterpieces crafted by artists. The hologram showed a news report. The Redeemers have seemed to disappear. Their last message was simply this: that which kills has come back. At 3 p.m. today, World leaders will gather in Brussels to consider Earth's response. Nex tightened his grip on his briefcase. Humanity could survive without the Redeemers, of course. There was no danger of that. They had the technology now, and they had developed the maturity to recognize their responsibility, for the most part. But what of the Redeemers? What was killing them? Nex had always understood that which kills to be an anthropological phenomenon, the kind that philosophers had ruminated on for centuries. The Redeemers were above such squabbles. They were a culture of restoration and mission, not of infighting. In fact, much of the renewed governments built across the world were based upon their common good frameworks. The Omaha meeting was canceled, and Nex returned home. Industry halted as humanity collectively called for a response. Within 24 hours of the Redeemers disappearing, a mission was announced. Humanity would form a fleet of ships to travel to the Redeemers' home planet and offer their assistance. Teams were formed, warehouses built, departments created. Households and communities voluntarily entered into thin times, donating huge swaths of food and material to the cause. Nex was home, pacing in his living room. He remembered his great-grandfather's journals that detailed how his father had done the same thing. Perhaps it was genetic. Nex could not sit still. His wife, Longa, had given up trying to get him to sit and be still. But she channeled her energy in her own way, organizing fundraising efforts at her church. Nex was not religious, but supported her from a distance all the same. The phone rang. Each household had but one phone, which would seem archaic by the standards of pre-bleakness times. Is this Nex Oxenrider? Yes, and this is? I am Mitchell Reese. I work with the Department of Interstellar Missions. I'm calling to see if you might be interested in joining our organization. 1,000 thoughts entered Nex's mind. His adult children would be better for this. They were young and ambitious. His daughter had just entered her courtship retreat, but she would be available in a couple months. His son was completing his studies now and would be an excellent candidate for the program. What was the program? Nex had forgot to ask. What sort of program are you looking to hire me for? Agriculture supervisor on the Response. Is the Response the name of the program? The Response is the name of the ship. Nex was torn. On the one hand, he loved his life, his spouse, and his adult children. He loved waking up to dew and sunshine, the train rides and the friends he had made there. He loved his work and the happy faces of his neighbors who came to him for tomatoes, squash, and sweet peas, his specialties. Although hydroponic greenhouses eliminated the concept of seasonal crops, he enjoyed pumpkins and apples in the fall, mangoes and oranges in the summer, and thick stews in the winter. I should tell you, Mr. Oxenrider, that we don't know what's out there. There is a significant possibility volunteers won't come back. We will not force you to go. We only ask you to listen to the earth. Listen to the earth. This was religious talk, a common refrain from those who practiced the tenets. In logical terms, it was an appeal both to emotions and the divine. I need to talk to my spouse. Nex would not be hypnotized by superstition, however noble it may be. He needs time to consider this, to think. We need a response by tomorrow, Reese said. I don't mean to rush you, but the earth dictates a response. Nex first called Elle, his daughter and voice of reason. The two had always been close, while his son and wife, the emotionally intelligent pair, had their own kind of closeness. Elle was upset even before Nex had an opportunity to tell her the news. Things are going not great, she confessed. Not great how? We arrived at the meeting ground this morning to meet our assigned partners, and I don't know. It's a lot. And with the news of the Redeemers, everyone's reeling, running around wanting to help, slowing the whole process. Like Nex, Elle was pragmatic to a fault. She was meant to meet her future spouse, The person whom the decider had calculated would be her best match among compatible Baxilors. She had been excited for this trip, as it was the next point on her path to success, nabbing a spouse as ambitious and firm as she was. "And if it's not too much trouble," she had added one evening as they shared a glass of post-dinner wine, "they should be hot." Next didn't expect things to be going south so quickly for Elle. "Well, what's the problem? The decider doesn't know me at all. The guy I'm paired with." There was an unusual quiver to her voice, one Nex had not heard since she was still a little girl in pigtails. "A bad guy, then?" No, not bad. I don't know him so well. Dad." She wanted to say more, but some unspoken protocol kept her from falling apart. What did it mean that her daughter couldn't cry to him? What kind of parent wasn't safe enough? "Well, sweet pea, if I know you, and I think I do, then you will overcome this. If you need anything, you know you can call me, right?" The words slipped out before he could stop himself. In fact, soon, she wouldn't be able to call him. Perhaps never again. "Thanks, Dad. Now, what's up? What do you need?" He opened his mouth to talk, but nothing came out. This wasn't how he wanted to tell her, but there wouldn't be time any other way. "Just that I love you, P." "Okay, well, I love you too. But that's bullshit. What did you really call about?" She could see right through him. He chuckled, an unsuspected snuffle finding its way into his voice. "Wait, are you okay?" She paused for only a second. "You're going to the Redeemers, aren't you? You're getting on the ship. They need food, and they'll need you. You're leaving." "Afraid so." "No." Ella had also heard the news on a train. On the day the Redeemers disappeared, she was headed to Colorado, where a small resort hosted the meeting grounds. It was here that Elle and the other young Baxilors would meet their future spouses as assigned by the Decider. The Decider itself was a gift from the Redeemers. The artificial intelligence was capable of highly accurate predictions drawn from its vast knowledge of human history and informed predominantly by a creation-centric ethic. It was trusted to assign spouses, craft global policy, predict weather, and even solve personal disputes. The Decider had amassed a significant following, a religion forming around it as well. Humans, it seemed to Elle, barely needed a reason to form religion. She was like her father in this way, tolerant of the faithful, but far too reasonable to have faith herself. She was happy as she was, a discerning, hard-working, intelligent woman who needed no god, alien, machine, or otherwise, to complete her. Quiet chatter filled the dining cart, where she sat with a cup of coffee and began rereading through A History of Medicine, the Industrial Revolution to today. People had once believed some truly strange things: ice-pick lobotomies, bloodletting, chemotherapy, gender binaries. It was also barbaric. But of course it was all they knew then. The people of the past could be forgiven for ignorance, couldn't they? A train car door slipped open, and several young people filtered through, including one young man toting an oxygen tank behind him. His skin was pale, and his eyes were sunken. He wore a face mask over his mouth and nose. Such a shame, she thought. It was clearly wastings, a disease from the bleakness, incurable even with the technology we have now. Children who developed wastings never usually lasted past their 10th year. This guy looked like he was nearing 20, a sickly 20, that is. Why would the Decider send him here? A hologram appeared on the dining cart wall just above a platter of scones. The Redeemers have seemed to disappear. Their last message was simply this: that which kills has come back. At 3 p.m. today, world leaders will gather in Brussels to consider Earth's response. That was a strange development. Elle knew her mother would want to help out, send resources to whatever initiative was meant to respond. She would probably rally church ladies to the cause, knitting sweaters and cooking meals and whatever else church ladies do. The other people in the cart watched the news report intently. Scenes of the empty sky, where a delegation ship once hovered, showed on the faintly glowing screen. This was no big tragedy for humanity, Ella knew. The Redeemers gave us all the knowledge they had, and we taught them what we knew as well. Maybe this was it, the end of the Alliance. All good things must come to an end, right? Besides, there were much, much bigger things to be focusing on, like her honeymoon. Would her future spouse want to go somewhere tropical or somewhere scenic? Surfing or skiing? And after that, where would they want to settle down? Maybe he would want to begin working at the medical guild as well, earning a doctorate and his golden stethoscope. That was a silly ritual for new doctors, she knew, but the more she thought about it, the more she needed a golden stethoscope hanging in her future office. As a crowd began forming in the dining cart, Elle retreated to her cabin several cars down. It was cramped, but plenty big enough for her and her things. She sprawled out, counted her breaths, and drifted to sleep. A voice came over the intercom sometime later. "We have arrived to the meeting grounds. Please exit the train according to your boarding ticket. Thank you for riding with us, and good luck with your future." Elle was part of Group 1. She rubbed the sand from her eyes and grabbed her things, 2 neatly packed suitcases and a backpack. She didn't need to pack. She was always packed and always ready. She was first on, first off, always ahead of time. When Elle walked, she walked with her head held high and purpose in her step. To become confident, Elle had once read, one must first act the part. She stepped off the train and gazed with amazement at the snow-capped mountains on the horizon. She knew about mountains, but seeing them was always something special. Whatever tiny spark of spirituality she had always ignited before mountains. The hotel itself was a reclaimed structure from the bleakness. It had once been a fine hotel and restaurant, but was left dilapidated when society fell apart and tourism evaporated. Its frames stood strong, and the government turned it into the meeting grounds. The restoration was magnificent. Ivy-covered brick walls wrapped around the outside, and a massive door was held open by facilitators, who were licensed relationship coaches and therapists. This last part of the retreat was to educate partners about relationship dynamics and to build the new relationship on a foundation of trust and cooperation. "The love is yours to develop on your own," the pamphlet said. Elle checked in and brought her stuff up to her room. It was probably the nicest hotel room she'd been in. She and Dad would sometimes take trains around the country for seminars and meetings, and they would share a room together, going over agendas and expense reports. Her brother would have hated it, which is why he always stayed back with Mom. But for Elle and Dad, it was a dream come true. The rooms were never much to behold, but the company was always good. Standing in this pristine room with its own phone and, what's that, 2 shower heads in the shower? It was nice, but still empty without Dad. The woman at the check-in counter advised that in an hour there would be dinner, and there she would be seated with her future spouse. Ella's heart was aflutter with excitement and nerves. Maybe, she thought to herself, if things go well, then the room won't stay so lonely for long. The very thought gave her butterflies. Ella showered, put on some light makeup. Don't want false advertising in the first impression, and a simple but smart black slip. She nodded to the mirror. She looks good. She's ready. It's going to be fun. Outside the ballroom was a table with facilitators sending bachelors to their tables to either wait for or meet their match. "Name?" one middle-aged woman asked through a smile that seemed equally as excited as the bachelors. That was one of the many good things about the decider. People were placed in jobs that they were meant for. Elle figured this woman, whose name tag read Marie, was probably a hopeless romantic. This same job would be torture for Elle, but for Marie, paradise. Elle Oxenrider. Ah, Elle, you are at table 14. Good luck. Thank you, Elle said, returning Marie's sugary, sweet smile. The table was empty when Elle arrived. That meant she would be the one waiting. That was fine, she supposed, although she didn't love watching everybody filter in, wondering if that person was the one heading to table 14 as well. She snuck a glance at herself with her pocket mirror, just to make sure her eyeliner wasn't smudged and her hair was neat. Most of the people with longer hair like her wore it down around their shoulder. Ella wore it up in a tight bun. That was who she was: organized, prepared, capable. Having her hair down was for later. The butterflies returned. Hello. A muffled voice greeted her from across the table. Her heart seemed to stop entirely. Before her stood, if you could call it standing, the Wastings boy from the train. With a weak hand, he pulled the chair opposite her away from the table and sat down. I'm Since, he told her as he pulled his mask down, revealing a gaunt face that might have been handsome, but wasn't. Since? Elle's voice was a weak whisper. Wait, if you're Since, then who am I? It was a joke, a bad one, like Dad would tell if he was aiming to be more annoying than funny. And in that moment, she wanted her dad, his calm, slow wisdom, to help her keep her head on straight. Then she noticed the eyes. Around her, in her peripheral vision, couples were looking at them sympathetically. They looked at him, the dying boy, and her, the soon-to-be widow. I'm kidding, he smiled. A full mouth of teeth, probably dentures. Wastings made your teeth and hair fall out. Since was wearing a knit cap, probably bald underneath. Yes, I get it, Ella said flatly. So, Since said as he sat down, we should talk about the dying elephant in the room. Ella gulped. She did not appreciate his levity right now, during the biggest catastrophe in her life. But it wasn't fair to take it out on him, the dying guy. The butterflies in her stomach became razor blades, and she had to fight the urge to vomit. How long? She whispered. My whole life, Since shrugged. I honestly didn't think I'd get here. Didn't want to be here for obvious reasons. But the decider was intent. It's just been me and old Jenny here since I can remember. He patted his oxygen tank, which Elle just noticed was plastered with stickers of bands and slogans she didn't recognize. I'm really sorry it's me. He spoke quietly and sympathetically across the table. Tears stung in Elle's eyes. This was not the time to cry. Not here. Not in front of all these couples trying to have a good time. Not in front of a dying person. I mean, how long do you have left? You know as well as I do that I'm on borrowed time. That history of medicine book you were reading on the train would have told you as much. He was watching me on the train? But of course, she had also watched him. Enough to register the disease he suffered from. The rest of the meal, which Ella barely touched, was awkward. He attempted to make self-depreciating jokes, while she pretended to be amused and focused nearly all her energy on not crying, vomiting, or screaming. Nex called Vone, his son, and told him the news. It was easier than with Ella. Vone was mature, in touch with his emotions, and noble. You have to go. I don't want you to go, but you have to. You have to save them. Nex appreciated the virtuous response, no doubt inherited from Vone and his mom's faith. But right then, he wanted his kids to cry over him, to hold tightly to him, to beg him to stay. Elle had somewhat, but some selfish part of him wished his family would panic over this, like he was panicking inside. I'm catching a train home tonight. I'm going to take my summer early. How's Mom taking it? I haven't told Mom yet, Nex confessed. You haven't told Mom? How could you tell me without telling Mom first? He had a good point. Maybe Nex was just putting the hardest part off. How does one tell their spouse that very soon they would go away forever? Nex wanted to cry, just thinking of it. I don't know, was all Nex could muster. I've got to go. I'll see you tonight, okay? Okay. I love you, son. I love you, Dad. Longa returned home with a spring in her step. She was always so effective in a crisis. Maybe that's why the decider paired them together. Nex was the calm logic, and Longa was the emotional firebrand. They completed one another, their eccentricities not a source of ire, but a hilarious quirk the other found adorable. She floated over to Nex and gave him a peck on the lips. You would not believe the day I've had, she groaned as she made her way to the kitchen. Everyone wants to help. Everyone wants to be a helper. No, not a helper. The helper, the shot callers. She made her way back to the living room, where Nex was sitting, and plopped down next to him with a cocktail in her hand. And what is it that you want to be? The helper, of course. Aren't you listening? He laughed to himself, and in that moment, Longa really looked at him. What's up? How does one begin this conversation? Once upon a time, people would get divorced from their partners. They would choose to end a relationship. How would one begin that conversation? He almost envied them. It would be so much easier if Longa was some kind of horrible monster. I got a phone call today. Longa set her drink on the coffee table and turned her body to face him with all of herself. Her hand squeezed his shoulder. Okay. They want me on the ship that's going to go and find the Redeemers. Oh. Her hand shook on his shoulder. When? About a week and a half from now. Oh. Longa pulled him into her, twisting her body to wrap around his. She was at both times comforting Nex and trying to be as close to him as possible, to smell his skin and listen to his heartbeat. For the first time in a long time, she had no words. They sat like that for a long while, holding one another, not talking. There was nothing to say. Only tears. Dinner ended. Elle excused herself to the luxurious, lonely room. She would cry under both shower heads tonight. That, and talk to Dad. He would know what to say. Maybe he'd come out here and keep me company. No, that would be weird. Just a phone call would be fine. She opened a notebook and began frantically recording information, getting all the variables and moving parts on the page. Here's what we know. My partner is dying. What else? Nothing else. She ripped the page out and threw it in the wastebasket. Here's what we know. My partner is dying. Everything else in her life seemed to pale in comparison. It was laughable that she had been thinking of a honeymoon earlier. And her career? A job? What about kids? None of that seemed to matter. Since was a showstopper, that asshole, no, not an asshole, a dying person who didn't choose this any more than I did. Her phone rang on the desk beside her, jolting her from her bout of self-pity. Hello? Things going? She sighed into the receiver. Things are going not great. There was no sense beating around the bush with Dad. He saw right through her. Not great how? We arrived at the meeting ground this morning to meet our assigned partners, and I don't know. It's a lot. And with the news of the Redeemers, everyone's reeling, running around, wanting a help, slowing the process. This wasn't true, and Elle didn't know why she lied about it. The staff had actually made a point to tell the attendees that the current crisis should not affect operations at the meeting ground. Well, Dad said, trying to recenter the conversation. What's the problem? Ella stood with the phone in her hand. The decider doesn't know me at all. The guy I'm paired with. Where to even begin? A bad guy, then? How could anyone call him bad? He looked like one of those charity cases on pre-bleakness infomercials. A sad song played in her head every time she tried to picture him. No, Not bad. I don't know him so well. Dad. She didn't know what to say. She didn't want her dad worrying for nothing, or for him to think she was weak. They were close in their strength, bonded by it. She didn't want him to hear her cry. Well, sweet pea, if I know you, and I think I do, then you will overcome this. If you need anything, you know you can call me, right? The name Sweet Pea was like a punch in the gut. She felt herself reverting to a 5-year-old sitting on Dad's lap. She wanted to be there, where there were no existential crises. Thanks, Dad. Now what's up? What do you need? She changed the subject quickly. Just that I love you, Pea. Sweet Pea. 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 Sweetie. These had all become trigger words. Okay, well, I love you too, but that's bullshit. What did you really call about? He chuckled over the line, his voice somewhat staticky and distant. But she heard it, a faint sniffle. Something was up. What could be up? Dad couldn't be broken up about the Redeemers gone, and if something happened to Mom or Vone, then he would have led with that. Wait, are you okay? In that moment, it all clicked. The Redeemers were gone, and there had been word that Earth was sending a ship, that they were hiring industry leaders to assist with and make the voyage to the Redeemers' world. Dad is an industry leader. He runs food production that affects many millions of people. He wouldn't be upset to work on the project. He'd be upset if... You're going to the Redeemers, aren't you? You're getting on the ship. They need food, and they'll need you. You're leaving. Afraid so, was his only response. No, she answered immediately. All bets were off now. Elle became a sobbing mess. No, Dad, you can't go. What about me? She shouted into the phone. What about me? What about me? Gone was the put-together young woman. Present was the 5-year-old. Vone told his boss what was happening and that he'd be taking his summer early. Everyone was entitled to 3 months vacation each year, and Vone knew that the next few months would be catastrophic for his family. Hopefully, Elle was surviving in Colorado. Vone laughed to himself as he thought about the person who'd be shacked up with his little sister. What a wild ride he'd be in for. Maybe it was better this way. As Dad leaves, a new person comes into the family. It would be a distraction at least, an opportunity to not sit with grief, but to embrace someone new. Vone had not yet gone to his marriage retreat. He had opted to take the scholarly route, earn his postgraduate degree in engineering before setting down. He proposed it to the Deciders Council, and they approved. Apparently, they already knew who he would match with, but he wasn't allowed to know yet. He would dream about his future spouse, watch people on the train, and wonder if it might be them. Things were good for Vone, and even with Dad leaving, he was confident the family would rebound. He knocked on his childhood home's door and was greeted by his mother, who had been withholding the majority of grief until he arrived. He had been doing the same, and when they embraced, they let it all out. Nex watched the sobbing pair from behind, offering a consoling back pat before realizing how very awkward it was. Nex could slip out of the room, and they wouldn't even know it. He loved his son so much, but he was happy Longa was here to handle the emotional stuff. Vone made himself at home, falling into the old routines he'd once known not long ago. Dinner was made, the table set, and the family sat. Ellie's place was vacant, a gaping chasm amidst the solidarity they needed at the moment. How's Elle doing at marriage camp? The meeting ground, Mom corrected. She's having a little bit of a rough time with it, Dad said as he chewed on his bit of steak. It wasn't real steak, of course. Real steak hadn't been made in a very long time. Nex couldn't say if this tasted like the real thing. He'd never had real steak, but it was good nonetheless. Rough time how? Vone asked. Yeah, what's going on? Longa had just realized she had forgotten to call her daughter. In her defense, it had been a busy day, what with the aliens and her husband leaving her. She didn't say, just that the decider didn't understand her. Vone and Longa laughed, and seeing this, Nex laughed as well. "That sounds like something Ella would say," Vone roared. "She wasn't happy to hear about my thing, but, we knew she wouldn't be." They nodded in understanding. Ella was Dad's twin. What a terrible time to give that kind of news. How would she manage at the meeting ground? The three engaged in small talk, dancing around the looming sadness that seemed to suffocate the small kitchen. They reminisced about the kids' childhood, the funny stories they had, the trouble they got into. This was good, Vone thought. It was good to be here. A knock came on the door. Elle had ordered some food to the room. The attendant on the line invited her down to get food, that they didn't do room service. Elle used a combination of strong words to change the attendant's mind about that one specific policy. She opened the door to see Sint standing there, the handle of his oxygen tank in one hand and the other hand in his pocket. "Hey," he said through his mask. Elle knew she was a mess. Her makeup, light though it was, had run down her face. The straps of her black slip had fallen off her shoulders, and her hair was down in a decidedly unsexy way. "Hey," she returned the monotone greeting. "I thought you'd be room service." "Well, at least it's not the first time I've disappointed you." She smirked slightly. It was enough for Sint to know that his charm wasn't totally wasted on her. "Or, are you calling me a snack? Because no offense, I was really hoping to hook up with a sick girl." Ella leaned her head against the still mostly closed door. "So, I'm not your type then?" "Definitely not. You're so..." He motioned up and down Ella's body. "Adequate." She snorted and opened the door wider. "Come on in. We're filling our grief with food." "Oh, cool. I can't wait to vomit it later." Sint walked in and sat at the foot of the bed, propping Jenny, the oxygen tank, beside him. "I've got to be honest. I knew seeing me would be tough, but it looks like you're really taking it hard." How very forward, Elle thought. "Sorry. You shouldn't see me like this on the first night you meet me. Let me freshen up real quick." "You don't need to. It's okay. In fact, you being uglier makes me feel better about myself." "Ugly? Sorry. Less adequate." Elle sat down at her desk, across the room from Sint's. "If it makes you feel any better, this isn't about you. Really, I've sort of been dreading this day for a while precisely for this reason. I hate to see someone cry on my behalf." "Well, it started with you, if we're being honest with each other. But I have some family stuff going on at home." He nodded knowingly, even though there was no way he could possibly know. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not particularly." "Good. Me neither. That's a lot of drama, and I do not have the energy. When's the room service getting here?" He dropped his mask and smiled to her, letting on that his callousness was a joke. "They probably saw you walk in and wanted to avoid infection." Ella returned the prod. Sint laughed out loud, throwing his head back. "Probably." He stood up slowly, wrapping his fingers around Jenny's handle. "I should go. I just wanted to check on you and make sure you were okay. It was a rough dinner." "Don't go." She said it before she realized what she said. Sint looked at her quizzically. Elle stood up, her body moving on its own. She took Sint's thin hand in hers. You need the food more than me." Sint smiled. "Elle, I can never be a good partner to you, but I'd like to be your friend if you'll have me." Elle had never wanted a friend so badly. "I'm 104 now, and there are more things than not that I have forgotten in my life. I can't tell you the first time I traveled to another planet. I can't recall the name of my instructor from school. And I've even forgotten the name of my first friend in underschool. I can, however, remember to this day the first time I had seen a human. Sophia Barton was the most beautiful creature I had ever seen. Sure, she was short like every human, yeah. She had the unnecessarily long hair that most human females do. She even did the all-too predatory action of baring her teeth often. Despite all of this, Sophia has been my closest companion since I was only 9. Why do we have to, Mom? Because they're coming into the council. Now stop fussing. My mother told me sternly as we waited behind the large glass walls looking into the ship terminal. It's stupid. Why does she need to stay at our house? I asked my mother, not seeing how selfish I was being at the time. Rules are rules, dear. She never went into much depth, even as she got older. When the ship landed, I remember how much I tried not to look. I even tried to wander into a different room, but the loud screaming that sounded after the engines silenced kept my eyes glued to the platform. She was tiny, her face was red and glistened from moisture oozing out of orifices. All I could think was how ugly humans are. What a shame they were being allowed into the council. The little girl kept creating such a fuss that I didn't even notice the hand she was holding onto was the hand of my father, 3rd Admiral of Council Collective Space Fleet. But after contact with the horrendous-looking humans, he was brought down to nothing more than a babysitter. Ew, she is not staying in my room, I said, with my face smashed against the window, ears raised to the cold surface. My mother merely shushed me, "Owie," and led me to the entrance, where my father was entering with his new, unfortunate luggage. My parents embraced, and my father even gave me some sort of wooden toy he had gotten on one of the humans' planets. I whispered my protests into his lowered ear, but he would be having none of it. The day felt like it would be the beginning of something horrible, especially if I was going to be listening to the disgusting sniveling sounds coming from the tiny human clinging to my father's large, grizzled one. It wasn't until I tripped down a flight of steps later, a few minutes later, as I was scuffing my feet in childish anger, that I realized that it was actually the exact opposite. Empathy, compassion, mercy. Call it what you like. But humanity has it. Every race in the council is powerful, intelligent, clever, or resilient, but the humans are just plain nice. The lumbering Marins are the least opportune race to face head-to-head. The Yez are known for their near-perfect soldiers. Grais are the oldest and most intelligent of the races. You'd be hard-pressed to find a Nami who can't con you out of the last credits you have left in your pocket. Then there are the Undarans who can withstand temperatures from 278K to 295K. It was barely 10 cycles after humans were accepted into the council that the status quo changed. You can call the council a plenty things, but perfectly cohesive isn't one of them. At least not 20 cycles ago. Territory is a lot harder to keep track of in space than it was when we were all just terrestrial races, especially when half your races hunt and pick some single planets from systems, and the other half take over whole solar systems. Some will say the war was the Moraines' fault. Others will say the Nami needed to learn. People are going to get angry when you're always pulling the wool over their eyes. Either way, the Nami had talked the council into giving them a planet from a system already promised to the Marines. What started out as a small border conflict quickly evolved into a full-out war between the Marins and the Nami. Races from throughout the whole galaxy were picking sides, and Council was looking for any way to end the war. The only thing the Council seemed to have accomplished was accepting the humans into the government and performing the usual protocol of hosting 1,000 of the children of the new race throughout the Alliance. For the first couple cycles, the war was barely a dividing factor among the Council. Everyone thought it wasn't necessary. Most races tried diplomatic talks with both sides, but no one would yield. It took 4 cycles for the Marines to declare the war to be about the Nami being the undermining race of the entire council. Their goal? Extermination of the every Nami, man, woman, and child. When I was 9, I wanted to be everything my father was: strong, unyielding, commanding. Yet that day, in the cold terminal, laying at the bottom of the stairwell, I wanted nothing more than to be like Sophia. She took no time at all to run down the steps, which were nearly twice the size she would come to tell me she was used to. I lied on the floor, whimpering, holding onto the leg that I landed on, which now bent at an angle all too unnatural. Her face was still slightly red from just moments ago, but moisture no longer leaked from her face, and she was completely silent. If it weren't for the incredible pain in my leg, I would have gotten far away from her. But there was no escape. Oh no, oh no, she whispered to herself. I had no idea why. You're so hurt, she said, as if I didn't know, but her voice wasn't informative. No, it actually wavered, as if she was going to start making those horrible noises from before. Get up, my father barked down as he stepped down beside me. Coddling was looked down upon by every race in the council. You didn't make to be sentient creatures by being weak. No, evolution took care of everything not needed. I don't think he can walk, Sophia quietly said as she looked up to my father from her crouched position. Then leave him, child, my father said, walking to catch up with the rest of the travelers from his flight. You can't leave him, she said louder, not leaving her crouched position beside me. You're his daddy. You have to help him. My father stopped, silently waiting for the young girl to follow him. He doesn't repeat himself. I'm not going to leave him. She had said, and she didn't. She sat there for minutes, maybe an hour. My father stood in front of us on those stairs with his full council regalia, staring into the defiant eyes of the tiny girl beside me. The pain regressed into a dull throb, but I wasn't going to test standing on the crooked appendage. It's no wonder you humans are so small. If you let every member of your race reproduce even with their deficiencies, my father finally said, causing the girl's face to angle into what I assumed was predatory anger. Her nostrils flared and her brows angled in such a way that made her look like a hunter's kitten. They stared off, but my father relented. Fine, but we will have to have an important talk if you are going to stay in my house. My father lifted me for the first time in my life. It wasn't until that moment that I knew that it was a feeling that I had always wanted. Sophia once told me that human parents are actually very affectionate with their children. They can carry them until they're 5 cycles old even. Regardless, that was the day I had really seen what true strength, endurance, and command were. From an 8-cycle-old human girl, nonetheless, there were many voices for the first 4 cycles of the war, too many. But once the Marines' extermination declaration was announced, the loudest was the humans. For 4 cycles, the humans refused to enter the war. They sent aid to both sides, and they cautiously took their first steps into being part of the Council's political scene. They were the meekest of the races. Their voices swayed musically, though, and they often spoke with a passion. If emotion was ammunition, then they would have been the most apex race, but none of the others got where they were by feeling strongly on an issue. So no one expected the humans to be the staunchest war supporters upon the declaration. Hundreds of vids were made and sent to the leading council members. They started private, but slowly trickled into the hands of the populace. They were ancient black and white shots of the humans, low-quality videos of humans in their first information age, even a few videos of a sect of humans before their final step into the interstellar stage. But these were not just any humans, but according to them, the most wretched humans to have ever existed. The humans were adamant. This couldn't happen. They spoke elegantly. Fire-like passion spit forth from their speeches, and many races supported them, and in turn, the Nami. I can't tell you what I believed when I first heard the humans' war speeches, but I can tell you what I felt. Empowered. It was no surprise to me then that Sophia was one of them. Sophia had stayed in our home for 20 cycles, and in those 20 cycles, I had learned many more things than we taught her. When I was 11, I learned that they often keep other animals as pets, not livestock. Mind you, no, they took animals in, not for food or wool, not even security, but out of care. When I asked my father if we could have a pet, he told me I was being ridiculous and there was no need. When I was 13, I found out that human planets can typically range anywhere from 255K to 305K, but it's not uncommon for it to be hotter or colder. What all other races would call death temperatures, humans call frigid and warm. When I was 16, Sophia told me that there are rules on her Earth that make sure everyone had equal chances. She said even the sick and those born with faults were taken care of unconditionally. The poor are given aid. Freedoms are not privileges, but they're rights. I was 16 when I first felt shame for being born a torpid. When I was 19, the girl, no woman, yet again saved me. The Orion War, as the humans have named it after some warrior in the sky, was in its height. We torpids had decided to join the Nami. We sent troopers and tech to every front of the war because we have the resources, but that didn't stop the Marin from pushing through to our base world. Not when they had yes troops and gray tech. We were fighting an unbeatable war against an opponent who intended to conquer and exterminate. Sophia, my mother, and I stayed in the bunker of our home with my father's personnel as he fought in some front by the Nami's base world. We expected the Marines to make it here. We even thought there would be some damage from aerial combat, but we never predicted that the Marines would have the ability to make to land. We fought for weeks, but they never gave an inch, only took miles. Our bunker was blown open, and it was then that I learned the unifying factor between all races, fear. Sure, we have all survived to this point, but that doesn't guarantee anything. It was the first time I've ever felt like Sophia's equal. Everyone ran. None stayed behind to help anyone else, not even my mother. Well, no one but Sophia, rubble that I could never imagine lifting trapped 10 or so of my father's previous attendants. They were trapped and just as good as dead. If it weren't for Sophia, lifting what could have been easily 100 kilograms, she saved not only their lives, but mine as well. My leg has never healed properly since the day that I first met her. I often limped around, walking nearly perfect, but never again being able to run. But that didn't affect little Sophia. She ran over to me, squatted in front of me, and lifted me onto her back. That day, Sophia yet again proved to me why the humans were so different from us. That week, after human troops landed and forced the yes soldiers into surrender with their tactical genius, they proved to the torpids that caring for your brother made stronger bonds. A month and a half later, with the development of their pure antimatter bombs that pushed the Grei's antimatter fission bombs into obsolescence, humans proved to the Marine Alliance that genius could be born of will to help others. No more than a cycle later, when the Nami rushed forth from the last holding pen into the arms of the human troops, they proved to the entire universe why human compassion was not weakness. It was the Orion War that showed all of us that there were still things we could learn. It was then, after providing the Nami with aid and relocating the survivors, that we started to understand the humans more. On their too hot and too cold planet, With its too many predators that were far larger, faster, and deadly in every way, the humans' only asset for survival wasn't being strong, outlasting the elements, being stealthy, or even intelligence. No, the humans' best defense and most powerful offense was compassion for each other because, as humans say, united we stand, divided we fall. It was many years after of the Orion War, when Sophia was leaving my home, no, our home for Earth, that I truly felt human. Sophia has said many words throughout the years, words that burned and words that soothed, but one always confused me until now: love. So as she was leaving, maybe as a last resort or a final farewell, I said, "I love you." She turned back towards me yet again with her mouth stretching into a curve. "And I have always loved you," she said, stepping onto the ship back to her true home. It's funny, most species start out incredibly social, but as they advance in technology, some members of society start to become more and more isolated. The reclusive scholars, the wise hermits, the silent religious types, and so on. And as society grew and grew, so did the amount and types of social, inept, lonesome people who would only rarely interact with other beings face to face. And as society eventually reaches a point where interaction with other living beings for the sake of anything becomes unnecessary, then eventually all social individuals sort of die out, slowly but surely. Soon, computers would replace parties. Face-to-face interaction would be more and more infrequent, to the point where children would not even see their parents, being raised by nanny robots. Thus it had always been, and yet one race had bucked the trend. While they did indeed have socially inept and awkward people among them, their numbers were not growing exponentially as other races had at that point of technological development. The many races of the galaxy who had only ever really interacted via text, and a few brave enough to still play an MMO, had gathered the most social of their members to gather the necessary confidence to attempt contact. Of course, by most social, it meant people just brave enough to video chat, which was considered by most of the galactic community to be only something the most extremely social butterflies, technically they called them social etiquals, but that wouldn't translate as well, would dare to engage in. There was an Ophe, a race which looked similar in appearance to bipedal squids, by the name of Deska, who had actually managed to leave the house to get the alien version of pizza, risking being seen or worse, meeting someone in the streets. There was an unnaturally tall, bird-like thing which had, if rumors were correct, actually held a conversation as long as 15 minutes with another sentient life form. The other sentient life form had shortly after died from stress, and many others, who, calling in with holograms, were gathered to find out who'd have to try to contact these extremely social sentients, which went poorly. It took 3 months before anyone worked up the courage to say hi, and another 2 months before anyone dared reply. One might wonder how they would not have regressed mentally at this point, as would be most likely, due to the fact that they constantly conversed with NPCs in their video games, or dated simulated creatures in their visual novels, or even just read their many, many books. They could still stay just social enough to not cease having a need for higher brain functions. And if that wasn't enough, then the wonders of genetic engineering could fix anything. After 5 years of awkward conversation, several people who had died from the sheer stress of being forced to socially interact and more awkward, cringy conversations than you could realistically shake a stick at, the alien to contact the human race had been chosen. Alkir, a vaguely gray, bipedal, female lizard-like alien from the Qualki race, had been chosen, though perhaps the more apt term was that she lost the large-scale multiplayer game first that they had decided to have in order to determine the chosen one. She was quite literally shaking as her ship started its descent. She had been social, sure, often posting on social media, playing multiplayer games, actually managing to wave to someone once. But meeting an entirely new race, and one still capable of the mythical arts of social interaction. Face to face. IRL. It was not something she was looking forward to. It hadn't been hard to send the text message to the humans that they were going to be greeted by an official from the Galactic Independent Alliance. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to think of what her characters in her games would do in such a situation. At least they breathed the same air as her, and they didn't look too weird for aliens. She just hoped there wouldn't be a crowd. She'd probably die, right there and then. The ship landed slowly, and she gulped as she walked reluctantly to the ship doors. "It's okay. I can do this," she kept trying to tell herself. But it wasn't much use, her two hearts beating as if they were about to explode. She got up on the escalator and opened the doors. It was far worse than she could have felt in her worst nightmares. She had feared that maybe there would be more than 10 of them. She was certain that there was more than 10,000 of them, all staring at her. She just froze as the platform she was standing on descended down the giant escalator. She was screaming internally as she came closer to the humans on the podium, especially the one in the center, almost twice as tall as her, with a broad smile, looking directly at her. Why was he so strangely handsome for an alien? The platform finally stopped, and for a moment, everything was silent. And then the tall human walked towards her, reaching out his hand. In a form of trance, she shook as she extended her own claw. As he came close, he grasped her claw in his hand, and she looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes. And then, the human spoke. He sounded like everything she wasn't: confident, strong, proud. "I've been told you people have translation devices that will make you understand everything I say. I must say it's a great honor to be here today. As the President of these United States of America, I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, welcome you to our world and extend to you a branch of peace from the human race to the galaxy at large." She just held his warm hand and was struck by panic. Her internal monologue was not entirely coherent, but as she noticed that the handsome alien had stopped talking a while ago, she realized it was getting a bit awkward. She opened her mouth and stammered and tried to look away. I thank you. I'm sorry. I come in peace." That was what she said. Her internal thought process said something else. "Argh, you're ruining this. Argh, nobody told me their leader was hot. There are no conversation prompts to get me to know how to interact with him." At that moment, however, a realization struck her. In the dating sims she sometimes played, one would give gifts to the hot hero or colleague to increase their affection. She quickly let go of the human's hand and grabbed something from her pocket. Here." She handed him a metal figurine of one of her own characters that she had gotten 3D printed once. The human smiled and looked somewhat puzzled as to what to do with this overly muscled small statue of a lizardman. She then realized she hadn't even introduced herself yet. My name is, I am, Dr. Alkir, Special Envoy, from the Galactic, Independent Alliance. She knew she would get into so much trouble when this went badly. But then a female human, also remarkable to look at, walked towards them and whispered something in the ear of the male that she could not quite make out. "May I invite you inside the White House to talk further?" the male inquired. Grasping at this hope to get away from the crowd, she nodded imperceptibly. The woman gently took her hand and led Alkir down into a building, which was indeed very white. Led into a small room, it was just Alkir, the male and the female. "You're not good with crowds, dear," the woman said. Alkir shook and began to cry. Stunned, the woman looked at her mate and enveloped Alkir in her arms. It was the most wonderful feeling Alkir had ever had. "Shh, It's going to be okay. Just let it out." This continued for almost 10 minutes, where the woman comforted the small alien woman. The male looked somewhat uncomfortable with the crying. "Now, we need to talk a little. Do you think you can do that?" the woman asked. Alkir nodded and looked up at the woman. "I'm Jacqueline Kennedy, but you can call me Jackie. You've already met my husband, John. Were you expecting something a bit different?" Alkir, still quietly sobbing, just nodded. Through the next few hours, Jackie and John managed to coax out an explanation of what had happened, of how the galaxy worked, how almost everyone were so antisocial. Some people didn't even believe in the existence of other people. After Alkir had calmed down, and she felt a little better, they also started doing some of the official actions needed for mankind to enter the galactic world. Some star systems for them to claim, what kind of technology they would be given to help them. At last, they had a little break, as President Kennedy had to go out and explain to the very expectant public that the meeting was going well. Alkir and Jackie were alone for a bit. "Miss Kennedy, can I ask you something?" Jackie smiled gently down at the nervous, anxious alien. "Of course. Go ahead." Alkir still squirmed at talking directly, but had to know. "What was that thing you did, with the arms? It felt really good?" The look on the First Lady was incomprehensible. "It was a hug. Have you never experienced that? Not even from your parents?" The alien shook her head. "I never met my parents. They just exchanged DNA samples by post and found themselves to be compatible, and then they grew me in an artificial egg hatchery." Jackie looked positively horrified, and once more enveloped her arms around the frightened alien. Once Alkir had been sent back into her spaceship, John and Jackie talked about what they had experienced. If they're all like this, my God, they'd probably surrender the moment the Soviets invited them to a party. Isolated from birth, surrounded by artificial companionship, never meeting real people. The president was clearly shaken. Alien civilization, so completely alien as was never previously thought possible. We almost have a responsibility to go out there and try to befriend these lonely, forsaken creatures. It's nearly a moral obligation for us, not to force them out, but to show them the warmth and kindness they have so long denied themselves. Jackie nodded and thought about how sad, how lonely, and how pitiful the first alien they had encountered was. Mankind, the only confident race, the last social race, never feeling a mother's love or a father's guidance, never knowing the joy one can find in one's fellow man. Mankind had a lot of work to do, but she hoped that they'd manage to help these many quiet existences. After all, a little kindness, a little gentleness could go a long way.